This video is brought to you by Brilliant. On Saturday, ISIS claimed responsibility for the devastating mass shooting in Moscow on Friday evening. This came as a bit of a surprise, both because, at least to most Europeans, ISIS sort of stopped being a thing in the late 2010s, after the international coalition against Daesh put an end to the caliphate established in Iraq and Syria in 2014. However, while ISIS no longer controls a significant amount of territory and is now more like your bog-standard terror network rather than the pseudo-state it was in 2014, the group is nonetheless enjoying a bit of a resurgence at the moment, taking advantage of security vacuums in Afghanistan, Syria and Africa to re-establish itself as the world's dominant Islamic terror group. So in this video, we're going to have a look at how ISIS has changed over the past decade, its recent resurgence, and how the escalating instability in the Middle East and America's isolationist shift could fuel them further. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start with a quick recap. After originating as an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, ISIS became a prominent force in the early 2010s by taking advantage of the political instability in both Syria and Iraq, especially after the American withdrawal in 2011. ISIS was immensely successful, and at their peak in 2014, ISIS was more like a state than a terrorist group. They controlled an enormous amount of territory, which ISIS called the Caliphate, spanning about a third of Syria and about 40% of Iraq, or roughly 250,000 square kilometers. This territory covered some relatively large cities, including Raqqa and Mosul, and at its peak, some 10 million people were living in territory under ISIS control. Within this territory, ISIS had their own laws, inspired by an ultra-conservative interpretation of Sharia law, and they were able to enforce these laws because no one else was strong enough to stand up to them. In other words, they had a monopoly of violence, which many sociologists since Max Weber have taken to be the defining feature of a state. In response to the emergence of the Caliphate, in 2014 a variety of international coalitions, including basically every significant national military, were organised to push ISIS back. By 2017, ISIS had lost 95% of its territory, and its forces were significantly degraded. ISIS were fully expelled from Syria in early 2019, and the frequency of their attacks in Iraq fell by 99% compared to 2014. However, in the past few years, ISIS has experienced a partial resurgence in at least 3 places: Afghanistan, Syria, and Africa. In Afghanistan, ISIS Khorasan, often abbreviated to just ISIS-K, have been able to take advantage of the Taliban's security shortcomings to establish a significant presence in the country's north. For context, ISIS-K was formed in 2015 in Afghanistan as an offshoot of the Pakistani Taliban, and has spent most of its existence attacking the Afghan Taliban for not being sufficiently Islamist. Before the US withdrawal in 2021, American airstrikes and commando raids by Afghan special forces contained ISIS-K to eastern Afghanistan. But since the Taliban took power, ISIS-K have spread throughout the country. They originally limited their attacks to Taliban targets inside Afghanistan, but in 2022 they started attacking foreign politicians and visitors in an attempt to scupper the Taliban's ongoing efforts at diplomatic normalization. In 2022 alone, ISIS-K fighters attacked the Russian embassy in Kabul, tried to assassinate Pakistan's top diplomat to Afghanistan, and stormed a hotel in Kabul that was popular with Chinese businessmen and officials. While they don't control much territory, ISIS-K are now well established in Afghanistan, to the point that they've been able to carry out attacks abroad. Earlier this year, ISIS-K militants carried out a brutal suicide bombing in Iran during a memorial for IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani, and killed at least 43 people in an assault on a political rally in northern Pakistan last July. Just a day before Friday's attack near Moscow, ISIS-K carried out a suicide bombing in the Afghan city of Kandahar, killing at least 20 people, including several members of the Taliban. Tellingly, the Taliban actually condemned the Crocus Hall attack on Sunday, saying in a statement, "We condemn in the strongest terms the recent terrorist attacks in Moscow and consider it a blatant violation of all human standards." ISIS have also been making a slow but steady comeback in western Syria, establishing operational control out of the Dara governorate and staging regular attacks in the Homs province and particularly around the ancient town of Palmyra, which was taken over by ISIS in 2015. In January, for instance, something like 25 Syrian soldiers were killed in 2 separate ISIS attacks around Palmyra, and the overall frequency and intensity of ISIS attacks in Syria increased markedly in 2023 and the first 2 months of 2024. This territory to the west of the Euphrates is normally controlled by Bashar al-Assad's government, with the support of Russian forces. But their ability to contain ISIS has been limited by both Russia's military focus on Ukraine and the winding down of the Wagner mercenary group, which previously accounted for a significant fraction of the overall Russian presence in Syria, and was widely considered more effective than the standard Russian army. Russian jets and attack helicopters, for instance, were instrumental in pushing back ISIS in 2022, but aren't being used as much as they were, presumably because they're needed in Ukraine. Similarly, in Africa, ISIS-affiliated groups have been able to take advantage of political instability and the security vacuum in West Africa. The spate of military coups in the region are both a symptom and a cause here. In many cases, the military took over because they didn't think the governments were properly dealing with the Islamist threat, but so far the new military regimes haven't fared much better, in part because many of them ditched their long-standing Western security partners like France and the US for Russia and the Wagner Group. Unfortunately, for reasons just mentioned, Russia and the Wagner Group haven't been as effective as hoped, and ISIS operations in West Africa and the Sahel have rapidly expanded in the past few years. What's particularly notable about the ISIS operations in Africa is the fact that they've been accompanied by territorial gains akin to what we saw in 2014, specifically in parts of Mali, Mozambique, and Somalia. This is particularly worrying because territorial control usually means more recruits, creating a dangerous positive feedback loop. All in all, even if ISIS has moved away from being a pseudo-state with a contiguous and well-defined territory to a more classic terrorist network, it's still a serious and growing problem. To make matters worse, the ongoing escalating chaos in the Middle East, combined with America's prospective total withdrawal from Syria and Iraq, which is something the Iraqi government started calling after Israel's invasion of Gaza, will only provide more opportunities for ISIS and other terrorists in the near future. Now, understanding exactly what has or is going to happen here can be a little tricky, requiring you to evaluate lots of information from different, often partial sources. It would be sensible then to begin improving your critical thinking skills so that you can keep sharp and better understand what's going on. And, well, our sponsor, Brilliant.org, can help you do just that. Brilliant is the online learning platform that's designed specifically to teach you everything from maths, data analysis, programming, and AI from the ground up. You don't need a fancy degree or to have dedicated hundreds of hours to studying any of these. All you need is a device with an internet connection and a few spare minutes a day. And with your spare few minutes, you'll learn by actually doing, with Brilliant providing hands-on lessons that help you play around with concepts, a method that has been shown to be 6 times more effective than just watching lectures. What makes this even better is that this content is created by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, and more. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description. And that way, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.